Sister Margaret Hale had never been afraid of driving at night. She had lived most of her life in silence, prayer, and routine. Darkness had always felt familiar to her, quiet, obedient, harmless. But that night, as her old sedan rolled through the narrow back roads of Hollow Creek, Pennsylvania, something felt wrong. The trees along the road leaned inward, their bare branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. Fog drifted low across the asphalt, thick enough to blur the yellow lines ahead. The clock on her dashboard glowed a dull red. 11:59 p.m. Margaret tightened her grip on the steering wheel and reached up, pressing her fingers to the small wooden cross hanging from her rearview mirror. Her lips moved silently in prayer. Midnight Mass at St. Agnes Chapel was only a few minutes away. She had taken this route dozens of times before. Still, tonight, her chest felt tight, as if the air itself had grown heavier. The radio crackled suddenly. Static hissed, followed by a low hum. Margaret frowned and reached to turn it off, but before her fingers touched the dial, the clock flickered. 12 a.m. At that exact moment, the fog ahead parted, and someone stood in the middle of the road. Margaret slammed her foot on the brakes. The car screeched to a halt, tires skidding just inches from the figure. Her heart pounded violently against her ribs as she stared through the windshield. It was a man. Tall, unnaturally tall. He stood perfectly still, his thumb raised calmly as if this were the most ordinary place in the world to hitch a ride. He wore a long, dark overcoat that brushed the ground and a wide-brimmed black hat pulled low over his face. Margaret whispered, "Lord, protect me." Her instinct screamed at her to drive away. Every warning she had ever been taught, every sermon about temptation and evil rose in her mind. But then he stepped closer. Moonlight revealed his face, pale, almost chalk white. His eyes were dark and deep, but his smile was gentle, reassuring, harmless. She hesitated. It's dangerous to leave someone out here, she thought, and God teaches compassion. Slowly, against her better judgment, Sister Margaret rolled down her window. Are you all right?" she asked. The man's smile widened slightly. "Better now," he said. His voice was smooth, calm, almost warm. "Would you be heading toward town?" "Yes," she replied cautiously. "I'm on my way to St. Agnes Chapel." "How fortunate. That's close enough." She unlocked the doors. The man walked around the car and opened the back door without being invited. As he slid into the seat behind her, the temperature inside the car dropped sharply. Margaret felt goosebumps rise on her arms beneath her habit. "Thank you for stopping. Most people don't anymore, not this late." She nodded and pulled back onto the road. For a while, neither of them spoke. The fog thickened again, swallowing the road ahead. The only sound was the steady hum of the engine and the faint rustle of the man's coat when he shifted. Then he laughed softly. "You don't seem afraid," he said. "I place my trust in God. Fear invites darkness." "Ah," he said. "Then I suppose I'm in good hands." She glanced at him in the rearview mirror. His eyes met hers instantly, as if he'd been watching her the entire time. She looked away. To calm herself, Margaret began speaking about her life. She told him about the convent, about her faith, about how she joined the church after surviving a terrible accident years ago. The man listened closely, nodding, smiling at the right moments. Sometimes his smile lingered too long. "Faith is such a powerful thing," he said quietly. "It makes people do remarkable things. Yes, it saves souls." He chuckled under his breath. As the chapel's distant lights finally appeared through the fog, the man leaned forward suddenly. His face was now close to her ear. "You can stop here," he said. "We're almost there. I can take you closer." "No," he replied calmly. "This is perfect." She slowed the car and pulled over near an old wooden sign that read, "Welcome to Hollow Creek." As he stepped out of the car, he paused and looked back at her. "Thank you," he said softly. "You've been very kind. Sister Margaret. Her blood turned to ice. She had never told him her name. Before she could speak, the man tipped his hat and walked into the fog, disappearing as if he'd never been there at all. Margaret sat frozen behind the wheel, heart racing. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. Slowly, she opened the car door and stepped out, her shoes crunching softly against the gravel. She looked down at the road and screamed. Margaret couldn't move. Her scream echoed down the empty road, swallowed quickly by the fog. The beam of her headlights illuminated the ground where the man had just been standing. There were no human footprints. Instead, pressed deep into the damp dirt were hoof marks, wide, heavy, and unmistakably inhuman. 2 of them, perfectly shaped, leading away from her car and straight into the fog. Margaret staggered backward, clutching the cross at her chest. Her breath came in sharp, painful gasps. This can't be real. This is not real. She dropped to her knees right there on the road and began to pray aloud, her voice trembling. The fog seemed to thicken around her, curling closer as if listening. When she finally forced herself back into the car, her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the keys. The engine roared to life. She sped toward St. Agnes Chapel, glancing constantly in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man sitting there again, smiling. But the back seat was empty. Or so she thought. As she turned onto the chapel's gravel drive, a foul odor filled the car, something burned, metallic, and wrong. Margaret gagged and rolled down her window. The chapel stood silent under the moonlight, its tall windows dark. Midnight Mass had already begun. She parked crookedly and rushed inside. The warm glow of candlelight wrapped around her, and for the first time in minutes, she felt human again. Parishioners knelt quietly in prayer. The organ hummed softly. Margaret collapsed into a pew near the back, tears streaming down her face. When Mass ended, she went straight to Father Thomas Whitaker, gripping his sleeve with desperate strength. "Father," she said, barely able to speak, "something evil followed me here." He studied her pale face carefully. "Sister Margaret, slow down. Tell me what happened." She told him everything. The man on the road, the way he knew her name, the hoof prints. Father Whitaker frowned deeply. Did he leave anything behind? She froze. I don't know. They walked back outside together. The fog had lifted slightly, but the air still felt heavy. Margaret opened the car door and Father Whitaker leaned inside, inspecting the back seat. Then he stepped back abruptly. "God help us," he whispered. Pressed deep into the leather seat was a burned symbol, a twisted claw-like mark scorched into the material, still faintly warm as if it had been branded there. Margaret covered her mouth, fighting the urge to vomit. "That is not of this world," the priest said. "You must not go back to that road." "I live beyond Hollow Creek. It's the only way home." Father Whitaker shook his head. "Then stay here tonight." She hesitated. The convent expected her back, but the memory of those hoof prints flashed in her mind. "I'll leave before dawn," she said. The priest blessed her car, her rosary, and her cross. As she drove away from the chapel, Margaret felt no comfort, only the growing certainty that something was watching her. Halfway down the road, her headlights flickered. The radio turned on by itself. Static filled the car, then a voice whispered through the speakers. "You forgot to say goodbye." Margaret screamed and slammed the brakes. The engine died instantly. The lights out. And in the darkness behind her, something shifted in the back seat. The silence was unbearable. Margaret sat frozen in the driver's seat, her breath shallow, her heart hammering so loudly she was sure it could be heard in the darkness behind her. The engine refused to turn over. The dashboard was completely dead. She didn't want to look. Every instinct told her that if she turned around, whatever was back there would see her fear and enjoy it. Her rosary slipped from her fingers and fell into her lap. With trembling hands, she picked it up and began to pray aloud. "Hail Mary, full of grace." Something laughed, soft, controlled, right behind her. Margaret whimpered and squeezed her eyes shut. The air inside the car grew colder, her breath fogging in front of her face. "You always pray when things go wrong," the voice said, "never when things are going well." Her eyes snapped open. The rearview mirror reflected a shape in the back seat. Not fully solid, not fully shadow. A pair of dark eyes stared back at her, unblinking. "You shouldn't be here," Margaret whispered. "I was invited," the thing replied. "You opened the door." Her stomach twisted. "I didn't know what you were." "That's the interesting part," it said calmly. "You never do." The headlights suddenly flickered back on, casting weak light across the road. The figure in the mirror vanished. Margaret didn't wait. She turned the key again and the engine roared to life as if nothing had been wrong. She sped forward, ignoring the speedometer, ignoring the sharp curves in the road. Her phone buzzed. She nearly dropped it. A message glowed on the screen, even though she had no signal out here. Unknown number. Hollow Creek remembers its promises. Her chest tightened. She threw the phone into the passenger seat and kept driving. The trees ahead thinned, revealing an old gas station, long abandoned. Its sign flickered weakly, letters missing. Miller's Stop. She slowed without meaning to. A memory surfaced, something Father Whitaker had once said during a sermon. Evil doesn't chase you, it waits for you to stop. Margaret forced her foot back onto the accelerator. As she passed the gas station, she saw movement near the pumps. A familiar, tall silhouette stood beneath the broken light. Same coat, same hat, same smile. This time, he didn't raise his thumb. He waved. Margaret screamed and swerved, barely keeping the car on the road. When she looked back, the station was gone, as if it had never existed. Her breath came in sobs. That's when she noticed something new. Mud. Fresh, wet mud streaked across the floor of the back seat, and embedded in it, hoof prints. They faced forward now, pointing toward her. A gentle knock came from inside the car. 3 slow taps from the back seat. "Margaret," the voice whispered, softly, closer than before. "You can't outrun what already belongs to you." The car radio clicked on again. This time, it played church bells, midnight bells, over and over and over. The bells finally stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the noise. Margaret's car coasted forward on the empty road, her hands locked around the steering wheel, knuckles white. The mud in the back seat was still there. She could smell it now. Wet earth mixed with something sour and ancient. Lights appeared ahead. A town. Hollow Creek. She hadn't meant to drive back, but the road had curved on its own, guiding her straight toward it. The welcome sign stood at the edge of town, cracked and leaning. "Welcome to Hollow Creek, founded 1846. As Margaret passed the sign, the temperature dropped again. Every house she drove by was dark, but she felt eyes behind the windows, watching, waiting. She slowed near the town square. A single street lamp flickered, illuminating a small park and an old stone fountain. The water inside was black and still. Margaret's car stalled. "No, no, please," she whispered, turning the key. Nothing. Her headlights stayed on, casting long shadows across the empty street. That's when she noticed the people. They stood just outside the light. Men, women, children, dozens of them, perfectly still, all facing her. Her breath caught in her throat. "Help me!" she cried, opening the car door and stepping out. "Please, I need help!" No one moved. Their faces were pale, their eyes dark and hollow. They looked less like people and more like reflections of people. An old woman stepped forward. "You shouldn't have picked him up," she said flatly. Margaret stared at her. "You know him?" "We all do. Everyone who stops does." Margaret shook her head. "What is this place?" The woman's gaze drifted to the back seat of her car. "A crossing. And you brought something across with you." Margaret turned slowly. The back door of her car was open. She hadn't opened it. The tall man stood beside it now, hat in hand. "Rude to talk about someone when they're standing right here," he said pleasantly. Margaret screamed. The townspeople stepped back in unison, as if afraid. The man placed his hat back on his head and looked at them with mild amusement. "You were told the rules. No rides after midnight." The old woman bowed her head. She didn't know. He smiled wider. "They never do." He turned to Margaret. "This town exists because of promises, broken ones, bargains made on dark roads by desperate people." "I didn't make any bargain," Margaret sobbed. He leaned closer. "Not tonight." The street lamp exploded, plunging the square into darkness. When the light returned, the people were gone. So was the town. Margaret stood alone on an empty stretch of road. Her car was parked neatly on the shoulder. The back door was closed. And written in the dirt beside her feet were the words, "One ride, one debt." A whisper brushed her ear. "Next time, you won't be alone." Margaret stood trembling on the roadside long after the whisper faded. The fog thinned, revealing the familiar curve of the highway leading away from Hollow Creek. Her car sat silently beside her, engine idling as if nothing had happened. But Margaret knew better. She slid back into the driver's seat, shutting the door with shaking hands. The smell in the car had changed, no longer mud and smoke, but something sharper. Old hospital disinfectant. Her breath caught. The memory hit her all at once. Years ago, before the convent, before the habit, the accident. She had been driving late one night, exhausted, angry, and distracted. Rain poured down, blurring the road. She remembered headlights swerving into her lane. She remembered the impact, and then nothing. Until she woke up in a hospital bed, bones broken, but alive. The doctors called it a miracle. 2 others hadn't survived. Margaret whispered, "No, I confessed. I repented." The radio clicked on. This time, there was no static, only his voice. "Confession cleans the soul," he said calmly, "not the debt." Her hands flew to her ears, but the voice came from everywhere. "You promised," it continued. "You begged for one more chance. You said you'd give anything." Tears streamed down her face. "I didn't know who I was talking to." "That never stops anyone," he replied. The headlights dimmed. The road ahead twisted unnaturally, looping back toward Hollow Creek no matter how far she drove. Signs appeared along the roadside, old and weathered. "Last exit. No turning back." Margaret slammed the brakes. The man sat in the passenger seat now, legs crossed, hat resting on his knee. She hadn't heard the door open. "You saved me. Why are you doing this?" He tilted his head. "I don't save. I collect." He gestured toward the back seat. Margaret turned slowly. The leather was gone. In its place were 2 empty, shadowy shapes pressed into the seat, like outlines of people who should have been there. "Not tonight," he said softly. "Tonight is only the reminder." "What do you want from me?" she sobbed. He smiled, showing just a hint of something sharp beneath. "Dawn," he said. "That's when debts come due." The sky outside the windshield began to lighten. Morning was coming, and for the first time, Margaret realized she didn't want it to. The sky grew lighter by the second. A thin gray line cut across the horizon, pressing against the darkness like a wound that refused to heal. Margaret drove with numb hands, her eyes fixed on the road, terrified of what daylight might bring. She began to pray again, louder this time. "Lord, hear me! Lord, forgive me!" Nothing happened. No warmth, no comfort, only silence. She reached for her rosary. The beads were ice cold, biting into her skin. One of them cracked in her fingers and fell apart, scattering across her lap. The man sighed softly from the passenger seat. "They can't hear you anymore, not once the sun starts coming up." Margaret swallowed hard. "Why?" "Because dawn belongs to me," he replied. "Midnight opens the door. Dawn closes the deal." The road signs ahead changed again. Hollow Creek, 1 mile. She shook her head. "I won't go back." "You already are." The car slowed on its own. Margaret screamed and pressed the gas pedal to the floor, but the speedometer didn't move. The engine purred gently, obedient to something else. As they entered the town, lights flickered on inside the houses. This time, people stood on the porches, watching, waiting. Children clutched their parents' hands. Old men removed their hats. Women crossed themselves. Margaret realized something horrifying. They weren't afraid of the man. They were afraid for her. The car stopped in the town square, beside the dark fountain. The man stepped out, straightening his coat. "Stay here," he said politely. "I won't!" she cried, stumbling after him. "You said not tonight! You said dawn!" He turned back, smiling. "This is dawn." The fountain began to fill, not with water, but with thick, black liquid that rippled like oil. The townspeople gathered in a wide circle. An old bell tower groaned above them. Father Whitaker stood near the edge of the crowd. Margaret ran to him. "Father, help me!" Tears streamed down his face. "I tried to warn you. We all tried." "Warn me of what?" she begged. He looked at the man, then back at her. "Everyone who survives a miracle here owes something in return." The bell rang once. The man held out his hand. Margaret felt her legs give way. "What happens to me?" she whispered. He leaned close. "You keep driving," he said, "just like you always did." The sun finally broke the horizon, and the shadows reached for her. Margaret felt hands on her shoulders. Cold hands. Not rough, not cruel, almost gentle. She tried to scream, but her voice wouldn't come. The world around her blurred as the town square faded into darkness. The sound of the bell stretched unnaturally, ringing longer than any bell ever could. When the noise finally stopped, she was back in her car. The engine was running. The road lay open ahead of her, stretching endlessly through fog and shadow. The sun was gone, replaced by a dull gray sky that never seemed to change. Margaret looked down at herself. Her habit was gone. She wore the same clothes she had worn the night of the accident years ago. Creased, torn, stained with old blood. "No," she whispered. The radio turned on. Not his voice this time, her own. Crying, begging. The exact words she had spoken in that rain-soaked car years ago. "Please, anyone, I'll do anything. Just let me live." Margaret covered her ears, but the sound came from inside her head. That's when she saw the passenger. A young woman sat in the back seat, barely 20, shaking, eyes wide with terror. Margaret slammed the brakes and spun around. "Who are you?" The girl sobbed. "I don't want to die. Please, I didn't see him standing there." Margaret's heart shattered. The road ahead reflected in the rearview mirror. A tall figure, thumb raised, waiting. Margaret understood now. She wasn't being punished, she was being used. "You don't have to stop," the man's voice whispered, though he was nowhere to be seen. "But you always do." Tears streamed down her face as her foot lifted, slowly, helplessly, from the brake. The car rolled forward. She pulled over. The young woman screamed, "No! Don't stop!" Margaret opened the door. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't stop either once." The hitchhiker approached the car, smiling kindly, and somewhere deep inside Margaret's chest, something broke completely. As he opened the door, the world reset. Fog, silence, midnight. Margaret sat alone again, driving, waiting. Time no longer behaved the way it should. Margaret drove for what felt like hours, yet the dashboard clock never moved past 11:59 p.m. The road stretched endlessly, looping through the same dead trees, the same bends, the same fog. But she wasn't alone anymore. She began to see them. Cars pulled over on the shoulder, dozens of them, rusted, abandoned, half sunken into the earth. Inside each one sat a figure, motionless behind the wheel. Drivers who had refused. As Margaret passed them, their heads turned slowly in unison, faces frozen in silent screams. Their mouths were open, but no sound came out. The radio whispered again, "Some people think refusing saves them." Her hands tightened on the wheel. "They never stop," the voice continued. "They never open the door, so they never leave." The road narrowed ahead, leading into a stretch known only by a hand-painted sign. The Long Mile. Margaret felt her chest tighten. She had heard the townspeople whisper about it. Those who defied the deal were left here, suspended between moments, never arriving, never escaping. She passed a car she recognized, Father Whitaker's. He sat behind the wheel, eyes wide, hands locked in place at 10 and 2. His lips trembled, silently forming prayers that no longer had meaning. "I'm sorry," Margaret whispered as she drove past. The man appeared beside her in the passenger seat, as if he had always been there. They thought faith made them special, but rules are rules. "Why Hollow Creek?" Margaret asked, her voice hollow. He smiled. "Because people there believe in miracles." The fog lifted briefly, revealing a crossroads ahead. 3 roads branched off, each marked with a wooden sign. Salvation, forgiveness, return. Margaret slowed. "Choose wisely," the man said. She turned toward forgiveness. The road collapsed into darkness. The man laughed softly. "You already chose once." The signs burned away, leaving only one road. Return. The hitchhiker appeared ahead again, thumb raised, waiting. Margaret's foot moved on its own. The cycle demanded another. The fog was thinner now. Not lifting, just thinning, like breath running out. Margaret's hands were steady on the wheel, not because she was calm, but because there was nothing left inside her to shake. She had driven this road more times than she could remember. Each loop erased pieces of her, memories, prayers, even fear. The clock still read 11:59 p.m. But something was different this time. The hitchhiker ahead didn't move. He stood in the center of the road, thumb lowered, head tilted slightly, as if listening. Margaret slowed. The radio came alive with a low, unfamiliar sound. A heartbeat. Slow. Heavy. The man's voice followed, quieter than ever. "This is the last one." Her chest tightened. "Last what?" "Last night," he replied. "For you." The road opened into a wide clearing. Cars formed a perfect circle around it, headlights pointed inward. Inside each car sat a driver, faces hollow, eyes reflecting the same exhaustion Margaret felt. At the center of the circle stood the fountain from Hollow Creek, now cracked and dry. Margaret's car rolled to a stop on its own. The man stood beside her door. For the first time, he looked old. His smile faltered at the edges. "You've carried the road long enough. It's time to rest." Margaret stepped out of the car. "If I stop," she asked quietly, "what happens to them?" The man followed her gaze to the trapped drivers. "Another one drives." She nodded slowly. The bell tower rang once more. Not midnight, not dawn, something in between. Margaret walked to the center of the clearing. The ground beneath her feet was warm, pulsing faintly like a living thing. "I choose to stop," she said. The man's eyes widened just a little. "No one ever chooses that." "I didn't stop that night. I drove away. I lived, and others paid for it." The fog began to move, fast now, spiraling inward. The drivers screamed silently. The man stepped back. "You don't understand. The road needs—" "Let it end," Margaret whispered. The clock on every dashboard ticked forward. 12 a.m. The fog collapsed inward. The lights went out. And for the first time in decades, the road was empty. Silence. Not the kind that follows noise, but the kind that comes after something ends. Margaret stood alone in the clearing. The fog had vanished. The cars were gone. The bell tower no longer loomed above her. The road stretched forward once more, empty. The sky was neither night nor day, but something pale and colorless, like an old photograph. Margaret looked down at her hands. They were transparent. "I stayed," she whispered. The man stood a few steps away. His hat was gone now. So was his smile. "You did what no one else would," he said quietly. "You stopped." "And the others?" she asked. He looked down the road. "They woke up," he said. "On the side of highways, in crashed cars, in hospital beds, alive." Margaret closed her eyes. Relief washed over her. For a moment. "And Hollow Creek?" she asked. "It's gone," he replied. "A town built on borrowed time doesn't survive when the debt is paid." She nodded slowly. "Then it's over?" The man didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "For them." Margaret opened her eyes. "What about me?" He met her gaze. "You became the road," he said. The world shifted. Margaret felt herself stretch across miles of asphalt, across crossroads and forgotten highways. She felt every tire that passed over her, every driver who prayed in the dark, every soul who begged for one more chance. And she understood the final rule. The devil doesn't chase, he waits. A car appeared in the distance, headlights cutting through the fog. A lone driver slowed. Margaret felt the urge rise inside her, gentle, persuasive. "Stop," a voice whispered. She fought it. She always would, because somewhere out there, another Margaret was driving through the dark, praying she wouldn't have to choose. The car passed by, didn't stop. Margaret smiled for the first time. Far down the road, the man tipped an invisible hat. Midnight came and went, and the road remained, waiting.